Hi, welcome to our panel session. Your application everywhere, just in a snap. It's about the snap tutorial talk, about the snap tutorial series, which I have organized, and we will have 5 workshops during this conference, so that you will be able to learn snapping, and for example, for your free software projects, or you join Snapcrafters or other projects to snap other projects. And now, at first on the panel, we have Heather Ellsworth of the Ubuntu desktop team, and in the Ubuntu desktop team, she is snapping desktop applications and GNOME for the Ubuntu distribution. Then we have Dani Llewellyn. She is one of the Snapcrafters, and Snapcrafters is a community project to snap any kind of application, especially if upstream does not snap them. Then we have Gustavo. He is from the very beginning of Snap, and one of the initial designers and creators of this principle. We have more panelists than originally planned. Then we have it's very nice. Thank you to everyone who has joined the panel. So then we have Zygmunt, also from Snapcraft. What exactly?
Yes, from the Snapd team, or now ex-Snapd team, but still a part of the community and maintaining some snaps I use and my friends are using.
Great. Yes. Yes, then and next.
Graham. Yes, Graham. Hi, I'm Graham. I look after the docs, so that's snapcraft.io/docs and Ubuntu Core, and a lot of the Snapcraft docs, as well as the Snapd stuff. I'm actually on the Snapd team.
Yes.
Which is where I kind of work from.
Yes. And Sergio?
Yeah, I'm self-introducing Sergio from the Snapcraft team. I think since the 0.3 release of Snapcraft, originally as well, part of the Snapd team, before it was called Snapd.
Yes. And Ken?
Yeah, Ken VanDine, I lead the Ubuntu desktop team.
Great. So at first, I want to ask you all, what are your favorite snaps, and why do you use them?
Okay, yeah, I would love to say that I am a big fan of the GIMP snap, and that's kind of how I met Dani here when I first joined, and needed to do some. I don't know. You always have some sort of design need every now and then. And bringing up the snap was great. And then I started looking at the code, and I was like, wow, this is a great example for a lot of things.
Not the simplest snap.
Yeah. But that's how I kind of got introduced to like the Snapcrafters. So it's a bit nostalgic there.
My turn. I was going to choose GIMP as well.
Oh,
no problem.
It's allowed to repeat.
Yeah. I like it because it taught me the most that I know about snapcrafting. As Heather said and Ken confirmed, it's a very complex snap to build.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would pick. I enjoy quite a few snaps, obviously. I think the one that I would pick is the Blender snap, because Blender is such a. I don't feel very often about. A bit emotional about the software that I use, but Blender is one that makes me, admire the community that we support and that supports us as well, because it's such a complex and at the same time incredible adventure in open source development. And I think it's, in my opinion, it's probably the best video editor for Linux as well that we have. It's unusual in the way it does that, but it's quite amazing. and the whole 3D software and stack, and I use it for imaging, I use it for tracking, I used it for 3D printing. My objects are all done in Blender, so it's I really like it. And the Blender Foundation took over, so nowadays they develop the snap, so I don't even have to do that myself anymore, which is super nice. So that's my choice.
So I have a couple of ideas, but I think I'm going to switch to a snap I made as well, but for good reasons. It's called Racket-Lang. It's a compiler and IDE. Packages as a strictly confined snap. You can technically put it on a core device and compile your code on a core device. And I found it really interesting because it's such a versatile snap. It lets you run your programs, lets you compile them in a CI job, lets you run a full-blown IDE, and it's a single snap, and you can just get it and install it really simply on any OS. So it's super nice.
So I actually create a snap called Demotage, which is like a home automation snap, but that's not my favorite. My favorite is a third-party snap of Home Assistant, which is a competitor to Demotage. But if you've ever got into home automation, you soon get hundreds and hundreds of entities, they're called. All of them configured through various little portals and entry points, and you put a lot of effort into making them all work. And something like that is exposed to the internet, and it's running on a Raspberry Pi, perhaps. And for Home Assistant, the default install is via Docker. But as a snap, you can take a snapshot of your configuration, you can revert to a previous version, you can make sure that all your configuration is saved, you don't lose it. And this is vitally important when your whole house is running there. I actually find it really convenient, genuinely. I have a lot more confidence in doing it that way than either through Docker or natively on the Raspberry Pi. So it's a lot better than Demotage.
Mine are totally different. I have two, actually.
Snapcraft?
No, not Snapcraft. I don't like Snapcraft. It's not my, I use it every day. My favorite is actually one snap I wrote, one snap I now maintain. One is Digicam, which I used to organize all my photography. I also now co-maintain it with the KDE folks. It's the organization DAM that you need for photography. The one we have, it works well in Linux. And then Darktable, which I love for my non-destructive edits for photography, which Kyle Pizzari started, also a previous Snap. Well, he's still embedded in the Snap community through Nextcloud and other snaps, but he doesn't use Darktable anymore. So I said I want to adopt it, and so I did, and I brought it up to speed, and I'm enjoying it every day.
I'm going to say Snapcraft because it's a snap that I use all day, every day. And it has evolved, sometimes a little bit bumpy, but it's in really great shape, and it is immensely useful to me. So as a snapper.
Can I mention another one? What about Snap-D Snap?
Oh.
Yes, this is great. This is great. This is a nice form of auto-updating of the system itself.
Yes. I also want to pitch another one too, because like with COVID, I couldn't see my family regularly, and my mom and my dad can only do Skype. And I was like, well, there's a Skype snap, and it just worked. I was pretty blown away by that. So still use it from time to time.
Yes, and I am the leader of the Open Printing project, the printing guru for nearly every operating system which exists. And so I would say the printer cups and the printer applications, but it's a little bit of advertising of my own snaps. For the printer applications, you will see a nice trick today in the afternoon when I give my lightning talk with WSL and recycling old printers, which is also a great application for Snap. And you see also WSL, you can use everything under Windows if someone of you is not yet convinced to have switched over to Linux. But also in general, from the Snap switch, as others have made, I also like very much the web browsers that they are snapped, because then you can enjoy newer web browser versions than your version of Ubuntu Linux is, because about this we will talk later. So that's it for the first round. So now, anyone of the Snap teams, Sergio or Gustavo or anyone else, can you give us a high-level overview of what snaps are actually. Not everyone will have listened to Oliver Grabert's talk in the morning, and perhaps we can give a nice small overview, and also for the ones who are watching the recording.
So I think we can try to do a few ping pong here. I don't have to answer the question myself alone. But I think an easy way to describe snaps. I mean, snaps do way too many things for us to be able to compress in the time that we have available, right? But I would say that snaps, they came to life as a way to get software installed on your machine in a way that was possible to do in a modern way, right? That was the mission. We wanted to create. Sometimes I see people focusing too much on the differences between the actual file format. Oh, this is an OS3. Oh, this is a SquashFS, right? While this is really in the scheme of the grand scheme of things, this is really a very minor point in our Snapd developer lives, right? We were creating really a platform, and that platform was supposed to be able. It comes from the phone, right? So we had a phone, and if you look from that perspective, it's very clear. You want to have applications on your phone that you can install whenever you want. So if Google releases a new Chrome, you want to have that on your phone immediately because there might be security issues, right? If somebody else releases a new version of something you want to try out in your car, you want to do that today and not in 6 months. And Linux, until then, it was actually, when we started Ubuntu, people thought it was impossible to maintain a Linux distribution that could release software every 6 months, that could be released every 6 months. Think about that, right? Every 6 months. Now, if people look at that, it's like 6 months is forever, right? Releasing something today, pushing to a store, and waiting for 6 months. Can you imagine
the Firefox cadence, right? Like, keeping up with that.
Yeah, so snaps were meant to solve that. They were meant to be a platform that enabled us and the community in general to push software into Linux, into Ubuntu, and into other Linux distributions that would solve that issue specifically. And of course, we wanted to do that in a polished way. We didn't want to do that just in a naive, awkward way, right? We learned a lot about user experience since the 90s, right? So we didn't want to just do another package manager to do something similar to apt, but in a slightly different way. We wanted to get those lessons learned over time, and we wanted to apply that on the system. So, I mean, I think that's a fair summary because we can go into detail.
I'd like to tag in on that, though. A couple other things. One thing, you were downplaying SquashFS a little bit. I think SquashFS is an amazing use for that because we're not extracting the files out on the file system that could then be tainted or whatever. It's actually a read-only file that's mounted at runtime. I think that's a very powerful feature in itself. But the other thing is, look at the way we're delivering Steam now. You don't have to go enable some crazy PPA that may someday have a Bitcoin miner added to it or something that makes your system unstable, or just using a newer Mesa for your entire desktop session. That can be bundled inside the Steam Snap, which then maybe makes Steam unstable, but doesn't make your system unstable, right? I think those are very powerful pieces to the puzzle. And some of those things are really being surfaced now.
Yeah.
Yes, one thing to say for the ones who do not know about the Debian packaging system and the distribution has official packages which you can right away install from the distribution, and they are made by Canonical employees and also community members which are approved by the technical board of Ubuntu. And these packages also receive commercial support and so on. But there's a possibility for any community member by themselves to add packages, but they are not approved. They come into a so-called personal package archive, which they put up on Launchpad, on the system which builds the packages for Ubuntu. And so with this, you have always the risk, if you take a package from this so-called PPA, that there can be a malicious uploader, or that the packages can be of low quality, that they easily crash or so. And so one has to be very careful with them. And so when one can replace the necessity of using PPAs by Snap And then one is in a much better situation for quality and security.
Yeah. Snaps are confined, right? Which means that the permissions that it gets on the system, they have to be, if it is anything sensitive, for example, even microphone, right? The application in the Snap wants to access a microphone. The Snap by itself can't, because it's a sensitive interface. So it has to ask for approval from the team that controls the store to be able to use the microphone. And in general, if it is a community behind it, a well-known community, it's granted. It's not about central control in the sense of just being evil, right? It's control in the sense of disallowing sensitive operations from being done by things that supposedly should not be done. And there's some of that you can do by yourself in your machine as well, right? You can do that. You can allow that specific Snap to access your microphone. But we have a way to do that by default as well, as long as that publisher is trusted to do that. So you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah, there's one thing that if you go all the way back before we had Snaps, and I was working on some software projects, I remember how important it was for us to meet the deadline so that it could be added to the next Ubuntu release. And if you miss that deadline, and if you have to miss the LTS, it could be like over a year or a year and a half until you have a chance to get it into people's hands. Now the fact that you can literally release on any day you like, at any cadence makes sense to your projects, it's so liberating. We take it for granted, but we didn't have that.
And for all past distributions, right?
Yes.
And for
you
all
don't have to release it multiple times.
Well, that's the other thing I want to piggyback on, the distribution model. This is maybe not the first, but it's a very popular way that the publisher has a direct line to the users, whereas that was enabled through in the Ubuntu world through PPAs before, but PPAs don't ensure the consistency of the system. Once you enable multiple PPAs. You have a chance to brick your system. Well, whereas in Snaps, everything is isolated, so you can install multiple things of different streams, and even like parallel install, which is amazing if you haven't used it. Multiple versions of something to try out, and I find that very powerful.
I think that we're getting low on time. We need to make sure we're able to take some questions.
Yeah.
Yes, we have plenty of time. We have still half an hour for until the end of the session, and the coffee break is even more 10 minutes later, and no talk here inside. So we have plenty of time.
Can I just take a moment, because I think the question was a high-level overview of how it works.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've covered some of the technical details.
Yes.
It is. Well, what's particularly interesting to me is that everything is a Snap. So even the daemon that controls everything is the Snap. The daemon's at the heart of it all. Is controlling the interface, as the Gustavo talked about. It connects to the base Snap, which is what has basically the core of whatever distribution you want to base it on. So we have like 1804 and 2004 and 2204. And then you have the Snaps themselves, which are basically pretty open. They are completely open. It's basically a squashfs file with a load of configuration and all the stuff that's all needed for that to execute, linked to the core, which is managed by the daemon. And that's basically all it is.
I've got an even simpler way of describing it.
Yeah.
It's Android App Store for Linux.
Yes, that's true. You are right. It's exactly this. We use the concepts which are well known from smartphones to and have converted them, mapped them, transferred them into the Linux ecosystem, and so we finally arrive at the point that applications and distributions for the consumer, for the simple user who does not compile, get completely independent. And this is what we wanted to do under Windows and Mac. It was always possible. On Linux, it was really a last missing step. And so installing applications just works now.
Well, this is, I mean, I'm not sure we put that way, because if you look at the whole history of package management, it was actually Linux that started the concept of proper packaging, right? So I would root the description from a slightly different angle, but effectively, yes, it's a way for normal people to install applications in a way that works and that allows publishers to reach those users with less risks for the users themselves.
One thing that we haven't mentioned really explicitly is like it's a containerized app, right? So you bundle it with the dependencies. So if you have this critical app that depends on Python 2.7, God forbid, right? You can plop that in there, and other people can use it on any flavor of Linux, and it's so amazing.
And there's a second side to that, because it's not only that you can put Python 2.7, it means that another app can use Python 3.11, and they don't bite each other. They're not going to break each other. And like if you look at the classical distributions and the supremely complex packaged like dependency trees and taxonomy on this belongs to a common and a foo and a whatever package, like Snap looked at reimagining that into something meaningful to people. Like, I want this app. I don't care if it's like split into 40 packages for reasons I don't really understand. I just want to use it. And the fact that you want this package should not impact the other packages I can get. And I think it was the first attempt of doing something like this, like just reducing the complexity at some point.
Yes, and one thing is also important because of the distribution-independent packaging, and this is especially in my area of open printing. The manufacturers, when the manufacturers of printers or scanners want to publish drivers for Linux, formerly we had only classic packaging like RPM or Debian, and there they had to prepare packages for every distro they wanted to support, and they had to test on every distro they wanted to support. A lot of work, a lot of cost, and now we have distribution-independent packaging, Snap. So the printer manufacturer simply makes one Snap for as their printer driver package and puts it up on the Snap store, and so everyone can use their printer from whatever distro they have. And in addition, because the Snap Store itself cannot search packages by hardware signature, I've set up on the Open Printing web server a lookup service. So a printer setup tool can send the hardware device ID of the printer to Open Printing and gets back the answer which printer application in the Snap Store is the right one. We have installed the printer applications on the server, so the printer applications themselves, they answer these requests, so that we get perfect answers. And so the printer setup tool knows which Snap it has to install from the Snap Store, and this will be implemented. This is already implemented in a patch for the GNOME Control Center for the printers module, and there are merge requests now, and they are they are processed, and they will be merged in time of Ubuntu 23.04, so that this will go live. And this was all done by 2 Google Summer of Code contributors who I have managed, who I have mentored, and this way we can we get into the world of printer drivers being snaps in Ubuntu 23.04.
Nice. I think Merlin had his hand up a minute ago.
Yes.
You want to take a question?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't a question, but it was to continue on the point that Heather made about the usefulness of snaps for software that is in my view dirty or old. I have a snap for a piece of software that was last released for Ubuntu 14.04, I think, and you can still get it to run on Ubuntu 16.04 if you replace some system libraries. And so I actually put it into a snap with those replaced system libraries, and you can now run the application on even the newest Ubuntu versions.
Yes, this is also a nice application. Yeah. It could even help me when there are proprietary printer drivers which are abandoned by the manufacturer, and so only work on an old distro. I could save them and make them available for the eternity.
And curiously, the same argument is valid on the other side of that picture as well, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you want to use the technology, libraries, language features, which were just released, a couple of months ago. For you to be able to release that, an application using that on a recent or an LTS Ubuntu release, you need something that allows you to actually bundle your dependencies and use that compiler for building that binary. So that's the other side of that same argument as well.
An 1804 user that needs this new app, this GTK4, you know, that they can just install it. Yeah, or just Firefox, because Firefox is always the latest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we will get rid of all the restrictions of old and new. We can combine everything. So distribution independent packaging does here not only mean that we have Red Hat, Ubuntu, SUSE, Windows, or whatever distribution, but we have also versions 1604, 1804, 2004, 2404, and so on, and we can combine everything with everything.
It was nice to see today the demo of Spotify running on Ubuntu
as a snap
on Windows via snaps. That was interesting.
Does anyone have a question here?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should make it a bit more dynamic. Yeah.
Yes. Let us more discuss here, because I think we got into an auto-stable state. In the beginning, when I thought I will give my first Indaba like session, I have to ask like hell to keep the session running, but the session automatically was working. You are so nicely talking, and so we have already everything explained more or less, and therefore we can now have a lot of time for discussion. So anyone has questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Obviously, snaps seem very cool and useful, and you all mentioned these snaps that were your favorites for different reasons. I remember you two mentioned GIMP because it was so complex and there was a lot to learn there. But what snap would you recommend for someone who wants to create their first snap? What is like a good one to look at?
What area? Yeah. Is it like server side, desktop application? Because the snap we can recommend might be different depending on your
Yes, and one thing is here many of us are speaking on the workshops, which will be in the next days. So Heva, you are on the beginners workshop, and Dani, what is your initial example to learn snapping?
It's hard to say. There's so many different areas, but if you want to learn like from the beginning, come to my workshop at 4. We'll start with like a hello world GTK application. We'll look at staging and local dev. We'll look at some more complex things. And there will be time to like, if you have a project in mind, which, you know, when I talk to people about snapping, they're often like, I have this specific project in mind that I would like to snap. How do I get started? And so we kind of walk through some of the 3 like main pieces of the YAML. And then we see some consistencies and you can kind of start from there. There's also Snapcraft in it. We'll give you like a boilerplate like Snapcraft YAML that you can start building on. And then depending on what error you get, right, it's an iterative build process. You try something and you build it, and if it fails, then you can be dropped into the build environment, poke around, see where things are, and then kind of go from there and rinse and repeat.
I would also recommend something like, right? Server snaps in general, they're not very hard because their integration with the system is usually networking. So typically it's quite easy to do. So picking something you like always gives you more motivation to make it work. So
can I also say, don't be put off. I mean, I think my most popular snap, which really has about 10,000 or more users, I didn't really have to do anything. It's YTDLP, it converts YouTube videos.
I use that.
Yeah, and there's loads of people using it. And basically, the boilerplate Snapcraft YAML kind of works, and it's obviously useful for thousands and thousands of people. So, don't also be put off perhaps by the burden of understanding a lot of stuff before you start. Give it a go, because it can just work and it's useful.
Yeah.
I certainly, when I got started, I dove straight in. So there was much less documentation as well when I started. So I think, if you have an app in mind, just get going and learn as you go. It should be, as long as your app isn't too complicated, you should be able to get going quite quickly, I think.
Yes, I think there are several degrees of difficulty. Probably the easiest ones are simple user applications. Then that gets a little bit more difficult if it comes to GNOME or desktops or daemons, because this gets more special and there are some tweaks in it. But for example, there are also rather simple daemons which would go rather straight away, as you do not have special system users or so, but only listening to a certain port and not more. But it can also get really tricky. For me, it took 4 years of intense collaboration with the Snapd teams in Canonical to get the CupSnap working.
That was very much an outlier.
Yes. So it was something very special. So do not try to see, oh, there's cups without looking at open printing what is already there. Let's try to snap it. You will get really, really frustrated.
Before taking Adam's question, to wrap it up, I'm here for the next 3 days. I know snaps.
Yes. We have still plenty of time because we have these 10 extra minutes and even 5 minutes in the official time. So we do not need to run now. Are there more questions?
Yes, we have 1 minute back.
So I sometimes hear about classic snaps. So what's the difference between a classic snap and a non-classic snap? And are there any different types of
I can take that.
I can take
that as well.
Yes. Yes. Please do.
So, I mean, classic is the word we were using for things which are not snaps. So what else classic packages do? Like you install something that has full access to your system. It runs on your system, and there's like nothing between the system and the package installed. So the classic snaps are kind of capturing this idea that it still packages as a snap, it updates as a snap, but there's no sandbox around it mostly. So it's really running on your system. You can not start because you have some new library it tries to link to that library, it doesn't work at runtime, or it can harm your system. So this was the word we were trying to use for those things. So this is the classic and the strictly confined snaps.
I think it's important to remember that building a classic snap is much, much more difficult than building a strictly confined snap, because you have to be much more aware about the libraries you're using and the way that you're linking to them if you've got a compiled application. Snapcraft does try to help, I believe, now.
Oh, it always tries to help, but...
But one thing...
So just to go to the gist of it, in a strict confined or dev mode snap, your snap lives on top of the base of the root file system. It is API stable. In classic snap, you have your snap here, you have the base on the side, and you have the root file system is your host file system. So you need to make sure that everything this depends on is linking or pointing to the things that is in the base snap. And by default, how load and load works, it'll try to load the root file system. So that is what Snapcraft tries to ensure. We can get that almost right, except for when you de-open something, dynamically load something, because that is something kind of...
But one question I have also, classic snaps are they are most probably not distribution independent. Is this right? No. So they are like a Debian package only for a certain distro.
Distribution agnostic. However,
they have
the environment can leak.
Yes.
Classic snaps were created because there's certain specific classes of software that actually need access to your system, right? And
compilers, IDEs, things like that.
Things that are deeply integrated with your system. So we had a choice. Either it would be impossible to do those inside the Snap ecosystem, or we would have a flag to enable them and then make them a little bit aside, considering the rest of the ecosystem. So for example, if you have a classic Snap, it cannot be installed inside the Ubuntu core, right? Ubuntu core only takes strict snaps. Also, people will be discouraged from installing. There's a special flag you have to use your installation that will warn people that, look, this can do things in your system that you may not want. So in general, we strongly encourage people to do strict snaps, because those are the ones that are widely available and that have no constraints in terms of installation. Yeah. Question there?
Yeah, fine. Snaps, obviously, they have advantages like Firefox, for example. I know that my Firefox is always up to date. I also know that the Firefox installations of my users are also up to date. And it was great with the 16 or 4 users that have extended support. when the Microsoft broke the developers before talking about some new versions, that we could say Snap install Microsoft Teams or whatever, it worked also on the old version like you. So, but I come from the infrastructure and server side of things, and my favorite snaps are U2 and LXD.
Yeah.
So to my question, one problem that I have delivering uptime services in OpenStack, for example, is that I want to work between like 8 and 5, and LXD's snaps and so on that automatically upgrade during my holidays. It's a burden.
So
I know that you can set like timers on that, and here is about to happen, and some don't do something in 60 days and so on. And they also have played around a bit with like, so if I know that I set LXD to not be stable, but 4.9 or whatever to not be to a specific launch, then it will happen much more ready. But how do you think about these things?
So,
it's a different use case.
No, yeah, that's interesting. So I think perhaps the way it can make you happier the fastest is just by telling you that there's a feature coming in an upcoming release of Snapd that will allow you to hold the snap, right? So it will hold indefinitely that snap. And there are also other features paired with that, which are oriented towards exactly your use cases. For example, you'll be able to select which revision of the snap you want to install. While that's been unavailable so far, we will actually allow precisely for those use cases, right? For use cases which are more related to maintaining infrastructure, work in production. We thought about several different ways that we could do the benefits of auto refresh while keeping the control that is required for those environments. And in the end, we couldn't come with anything creative. We just said, okay, let's actually just open it up and allow it to happen. Even because I think that the goals we had for and I realized that the camera will be awkward because I'm just keeping the camera here. The goals we have for understanding auto refresh, I think they're already in place, right? So our gut feeling at this time, after we met and discussed this issue many times, is that the benefits that we created, the culture of auto refreshes that we created, will not be undone at this point by allowing people to do that control by hand, right? We suspect that most people that do not require auto refreshes will continue to allow their snaps to auto refresh because it just works, right? In the vast majority of cases, it just works. And then you will have control when you actually want to really say, no, I want revision 35 of that specific snap, and I want it to be held in that revision until I say otherwise. You'll be able to do that.
That's the exact thing. I mean, I'm not against upgrading stuff. It's just that I need to know when it happens.
Control.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And I have a little bit more technical question. So bear with me with explaining. So I remember, I've never used that myself, so I always relate to other technologies to try and grasp it. I remember that, for example, Andbox was an application that was primarily shipped as a stack, which was for running Android applications on Linux, because it needed some custom kernel modules and all that stuff, and it was difficult to package, and getting it to run on any other distribution that was not Snap based or didn't have Snapd available was a giant hassle. And obviously that requires a more privileged access, right, to access kernel modules and stuff. Now I'm also hearing about printed drivers, but there the solution seems to be different. It's not that the external system is accessing the drivers, but it's that you just pull cups into the container, so that kind of thing works with different libraries. So what I'm trying to wonder is, what ways do I have to destruct in little pieces the parts that are hindering me in that sandbox to get those kinds of privileged access? Could you elaborate on that? Or is all of that use cases using just a classic snap where basically no sandbox exists anymore?
Okay, so that's a very good question. I believe, and Till will very quickly correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the cups snaps are strictly confined, and they're not using anything privileged on the system other than the standard features. So there's no, we tend not to use classic snaps ourselves, right? Indeed, we have a very strong policy inside the company of encouraging people, unless it's a case that is clearly a case you need global system access, otherwise this application just makes no sense, right? It doesn't have to run on Ubuntu Core. you really need access to the whole system, or it doesn't make sense. Then okay, then it's a classic snap. Every other case, even internally, it is supposed to be a strict snap. So our applications, Firefox, cups, our own stuff like microcates, for example, from the store team, from our infrastructure teams, everything in Canonical is strictly confined, and we try to create language in the store and so forth, which is general. So the inside the store, Canonical is not an entity that has privileges in that sense, right? The mechanisms that we created, they allow people to ask for those same permissions in different use cases. And indeed, if you go to the store, it's something I'm quite proud of. If you go to the Snapcraft store, you will see Canonical employees asking for permission publicly to use certain interfaces, right? This is done in a public way. So there's no strong privileges to go sideways.
Just did it last week.
Yeah.
Yes, and he's the leader of the desktop team. He's not some Canonical employee.
Again, I'm quite proud of that because it means the process works. Just this week, we had someone from the OpenStack team meeting us to ask for permission for using Snapd control, which is an extremely privileged thing, because if you have Snapd control in your system, you have everything, right? Because you can install anything, which means you can control anything. And we rejected. We said, your use case is interesting, but we don't think it's, given the justifications that we give other people and the rules that we have, we don't think your use case makes sense to have access to that privilege in the system.
Yes.
So that's the line we think, right? We try to be very honest with ourselves in terms of the why certain things are provided to which applications, right? And that's not so much about whether it's canonical or not.
Yes, Gustavo, and about the Snapd control, I also want to say something. When I was working on the snapping of cups, I went at a certain point when I wanted to create an interface with which one can distinguish between inquiries to cups, which are administrative, which means creating a print queue, reading someone else's jobs, and so, or not non-administrative, like just printing a job. And on the development of this, I went also into a point, I would need to plug Snapd control. But what was happening, how the Snapd team was responding to me, was not to allow me as a very, very trusted source, Open Printing, to use this interface. No, they worked with me together. They did even changes on Snapd itself, on the interfaces of Snapd. And I did changes on cups, on the cups daemon, so that we got a secure solution that the cups daemon can check whether the inquiry comes from a confined snap. And if this inquiry comes from a confined snap, that it plugs the cups control interface. And only if it plugs the cups control interface, an administrative inquiry is accepted by cups, which is a mechanism to allow you as free software projects, or you as community snappers for other free software projects, just upload an application into the Snap Store, plugging cups so that the application can simply print and not manage, or better, mess up cups, only print. And this is a very important part of this interface. And I have had to work on a design extension with a Snapd team, and I had to do changes on cups. Yeah. I will, if someone wants to know more details, please join my Daemon Snappers workshop on Wednesday at 11:30. And there I will also talk about the subject, about snap mediation.
Yeah, this is very common, right? The idea that sometimes you want to mediate something that there was just no such a thing. There wasn't something that would allow you to mediate that specific aspect of your application. And also in some cases, the mediation is not fine-grained enough. I think a very easy case for us that I'm always reminded of is the audio use case, Pulse Audio, right? we had to actually patch Pulse Audio because there was no way for us to diverge the permission from the application to play sound from the permission of that same application to record sound. But you can very easily see how those two things, in terms of sensitivity, they're worlds apart, right? Any application can play sound if you want to allow it. That's okay, right? But recording yourself, that's a big deal, right? So there are two. We ended up splitting that into two separate interfaces and patching Pulse Audio itself, so that by the time you go to play or record, the specific permission for that is required.
Yes, and my changes, which I did on cups, I derived from these changes in Pulse Audio. I've taken the Pulse Audio snap, and the patches with the Pulse Audio snap applies to Pulse Audio. The team has told me this and showed me that, and I've mapped this into the cups daemon, into the cup snap.
I think returning to the question a little bit more, if you have a use case that isn't covered by an interface, then do talk on the forum, explain your use case, explain how the current interfaces aren't meeting your needs, and we'll have a probably very lively discussion to try to come to an arrangement where we can get an interface into the system specifically for your use case.
The interface code is quite neat. I would encourage anyone that enjoys code to have a look at the Snapd code base. And I think Zygmunt would agree with me as well.
Yes,
he's a little biased.
There's one other aspect of it that is actually interesting. It's in the naming. If you look at how the interfaces are named, there's a theme that something is more privileged will have like control, the word control in it. So like if you have control over the network, it means something different than just being able to use the network. So as you start to use this, you start to see like, oh, this is completely different from that. But there's a pattern. There's a bunch of these. There's a bunch of control interfaces. And there's even more privileged interfaces that are allowing certain special applications to work, like supporting LXD support, for instance. So for these, no matter, like we were discussing, like the permissions to go to the store and ask to use something, but that was about auto connection. But some of the more privileged ones, you will not even be able to actually declare. So you can write that I like to pretend to be LXD, but Snapd will say, well, I don't trust that. Because they're so privileged, they let you break out of the sandbox potentially, and to use them, there's an extra step required. So there's a gradient of permissions from the more common, more safe, more accepted to those that are really special, but still have a way to fit in the system.
We're out of time. Let's take
yes. One thing is, yes, we can have some more minutes because the coffee break only starts in 10 minutes. Yeah. There's a little bit.
Let's ask.
I think the most attractive thing about snaps is that you snap install and then it just works right out of the box. But I think, like we've been talking, or like you all have been talking the last couple of minutes about these permissions and such. Is there any plan to kind of expose which interfaces have which permissions on Snap install?
So this is a on Snap install.
Yeah, like a prompt.
Yes.
How do you mean? Just so I can respond to the proper question. How do you mean expose during install?
Like sometimes when you install something, it'll say, do you want to install this software? Do you want to install this dependency? These dependencies will do X, Y, Z, or
enumeration.
So
is enumeration?
I think there are two different aspects here, which maybe there's even a feature requested there that we could do with the team to implement it. Every snap has assertions on the snap, and you can tell which things are approved. Assertions, I mean, it's a fancy name, but it's actually just a structured text document with a signature at the bottom to prove that somebody actually signed this document. The interesting thing here is that this assertion is just rules, right? All the rules about what is auto-connected or not auto-connected is in the assertion. And those assertions, they are visible to you. So if you know which commands to run, you can actually ask the system. So there's, for example, snap ACK and snap known, exactly known. Those commands is a way to dig into the assertion system and ask what is there actually. There's a separate question to your separate part to your question, which is more about interactivity during the installation process, which I'm slightly allergic to because of the past of different packaging tools asking you try to do something in the system, it requires the installation of 20 packages, and suddenly you're flooded with literally dozens and dozens of individual questions about, do you want to write this file? Do you want to install this interface? Do you want to do this? And it's like, it becomes very quickly, wild.
It starts to ask the wrong question. Like it's starting to ask, are you trying to run this or not? And you're just going to say yes.
So we have a policy in many of our tool development. We have a policy of no questions, right? So we try. It's not that the no question doesn't mean you should not decide. It means that sometimes we just say no, right? And then you have to say that's how I want the commands to work, and then it just works. Right?
And also, you should be able to initiate the installation of a distro, then go to the coffee room and take your coffee, and when you are back, the system is up and running.
Yeah, and that's kind of my favorite thing about snaps is you just snap install and it just works.
Yep.
I personally wouldn't want a prompt,
Okay.
and I think it would be nice to kind of output that.
To understand.
Snap info show you the things that would happen. If
I think what we're missing is before you install a list of the permissions that you get granted automatically.
I see. That's a nice feature.
It's an enumeration feature.
I think we should do it.
So both
It's a little bit like on the
phone,
phone.
in the Snap info output and on the Ubuntu software app.
Yeah, I think we should do it. It's a nice feature request.
I think Bradley has a question. Maybe you raise your hand.
There's still time for.
Yeah, of course there is.
Yes. The coffee break starts only at half.
2 minutes. It's
3
2
minutes.
minutes.
Go ahead.
2 minutes.
So, as some of you know, I'm a researcher at Ghent University, and I've worked with Canonical before on the Juju project. And we've actually used Juju internally for research projects, and we've contributed back to Juju as part of funding that we got from the European government, for example, which is possible because Juju is completely open source. Now, you hear me coming. I am a big fan of Snapcraft, and even at the beginning, it was very clear that it's a perfect operating system for edge devices. And right now, we're starting a lot of research projects that have to do with, for example, privacy on edge devices, which match incredibly well with the permission system and the assertion system of Snapcraft. However, it's very difficult for us to actually do research projects with Snapcraft because of this store being closed.
So I'm not sure if I can spend the...
Yes, you have still more than 5 minutes.
So I can provide some input into that. We would love for the store to be open source as well, right? And I think people overestimate how much we care about it being closed source. There's a lot of feelings about, but the store is not open source because they want full control. The actual reality on our side is that we wanted the experience. We wanted to create a platform, and we want a design experience for that whole system, right? And the issue is, I've been around for long enough to see projects being released into the community, which were basically just dumps, right? I think, for example, in the case of Launchpad, it wasn't a dump, but I think it helps to illustrate the fact that simply putting projects into the open is not actually enough to create a vibrant community out of it. And the reality is, we don't have today the ability to maintain this project as an open source project, because it's deeply integrated into our whole ecosystem inside Canonical, right? And by that I mean tooling, databases, configuration tools. Everything that is built is deeply integrated into our system. For us to push that project into the open and then pay no attention to it and not be able to get the engagement of community going in a healthy way is not great either, right? Also, we understand, for example, there's some feelings about the fact that apt was always a distributed repo system, right? It was, I won't call federated, because I think federation is something else. It was really something that allowed you to have pockets of knowledge which were independent from one another and disorganized. I mean that being, I've worked on apt development, right? I've worked on apt, I've worked on RPMs development, and apt repositories, they were not meant to work together. right? In the sense that if you push a package into an apt repository, there is a PPA, there is upgrade something fundamental into your distribution, you break everybody, right? Everybody that is using that is now broken. So for us to be able to create something equivalent to that system in snaps, is it rolled out? No, it's not. We can eventually do some sort of iteration that would support this. But what we cared about deeply was the experience. We don't want to create a split world where you can install things from different places and suddenly it's a mess, right? We want to create something that is clean. That when you install Blender, it's the Blender from the Blender Foundation that is coming to you. Oh, but I want to have a different Blender. That's fine. You can package your own Blender and also have that Blender, right? But it's a single namespace. The command line is clean. You don't have to do apt add repository from Joe with this GPG key. Is this nice to do? Is this powerful? Yes, it is. But at the same time, and reusing the terms from Dani, at the same time, if you think about how normal, between quotes, people expect to install softwares on their phone, they don't have to deal with that sort of bureaucracy, right? So again, what we care about and what we still care about the most is about the experience. We're creating something that is smooth, and we're creating something that we hope can keep us, the community, the Linux community in general, alive for longer, right? Because the threat is not our own internal fights, right? The threat is suddenly in a decade or so, we all become irrelevant because the software that we maintained is so prickly that people don't want to use it anymore, right?
1 minute.
That's what we're trying to address.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. Also to the one who spontaneously entered the panel. Also, thank you very much for all the interesting questions. And now I want to do an announcement, because this is not simply a panel session or Indaba or how you want to call it, but it is the intro for the Snap tutorial series. And the Snap tutorial series will start right after the break with Heather and Dani snapping like Ellsworth. Yeah. And this is the beginner's workshop for Snap. Everyone who did not snap yet is highly recommended to attend this workshop before it goes to the advanced topics at Wednesday. But if you are more interested for normal desktop or server distributions to make snaps for that, but you are more interested in robotics and IoT, you can either both snapping like Ellsworth and the ROS deployment workshop tomorrow, or it would be enough simply the ROS deployment workshop tomorrow. In that workshop, you also learn snapping from the beginning on, but in an IoT environment. At Heather and Dani, you learn it in a standard desktop or server environment. And with one of these workshops or both workshops, when you have attended them on Wednesday, you can get into the advanced topics, and there I will start with Sergio Cazzolato to do the Daemon Snappers workshop. Yes, I'm as you know, I'm leading open printing, and all my snaps are cups and IPP over USB and print applications. It's all daemons. So, and therefore I'm the one who is giving the Daemon Snappers workshop. And then in the afternoon, then comes Olivier Tilloy with Scarlett Moore, telling how to snap desktop applications, KDE and GNOME. But unfortunately, in parallel, in the other room, behind this nice movable wall on our side, we will have the workshop about snapping Flutter apps. Nice. By Carlos and Heather on Wednesday.
Can I plug my last session as well? Because that's very related. Yeah. That's CI/CD, not using the build service.
Okay.
Nice. Thank you.
Nice.